My son tore me down in front of our guests on my birthday. You're only good for scrubbing bathrooms. You're nobody. My name is Linda, I'm 46, and this is the most painful and somehow the most freeing story I've ever told. It's about humiliation, about waking up, and mostly about finding strength in a place I didn't think existed. It started on March 15th, my 46th. I had planned every detail. I bought the good tomatoes and ricotta to make the lasagna Jake had always loved, filled the living room with silver and white balloons, and splurged on a bottle of wine that cost almost half a week's pay. I wanted one night to feel right again, a chance to stitch us back together. Mark, my ex-husband, showed up at 7 on the dot, wearing that polite distance like a pressed shirt. Jake, 17, phone glued to his hand, trailed in behind him. For a second, as I lit the candles, I let myself believe we could pretend to be an ordinary family at an ordinary birthday. "Mom, can I say something?" Jake asked, finally lifting his eyes from the screen. His tone made something in me lock up, but I forced a hopeful smile. "Of course, honey. What is it?" Mark cleared his throat and folded his arms. "Linda, we need to be honest. Jake and I talked, and it's about Kelly." Kelly, the girlfriend who swept in 6 months after our divorce. At 34, she had whatever I apparently did not: youth, money, a glittering career, and the kind of confidence you get when you've never had to scrub someone else's sink to make rent. "Jake's 17, Mark went on. "He has to think about the future. Kelly offered him an internship at her firm, Prime Path Group. She can open doors you just can't." It felt like the air got yanked out of the room. "Mark, I work 2 extra hours every day just to cover his English classes. Mom, stop," Jake cut in, a hard edge in his voice I'd never heard. "You clean offices. Kelly runs 3 companies. She drives a Tesla. You've got a 2010 Corolla. She lives high up on Lakeshore Drive. Your place smells like bleach all the time." Each word landed like a slap. "Jake, you're only good for cleaning bathrooms," he shouted, standing so fast his chair scraped. "Kelly sees me. She sees my potential. You only remind me what I refuse to become." The silence that followed roared. Mark didn't defend me or him. He just stared at his hands. Jake grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "To Kelly's. She's hosting a real party with actual important people, not this." The door slammed. Mark muttered something about Jake going through a phase and left soon after, and I stood alone with an uncut cake and what was left of a family. I blew the candles out one by one and made the only wish I had left: to have enough strength not to disintegrate completely. I spent the next hours on the kitchen floor, hugging my knees, trying to understand how we'd ended up here. Where did I miss the turn? How could the boy I'd loved without condition for 17 years talk to me like that? How could the man I was married to for 15 years watch it happen and do nothing? I replayed the last few years, the overtime shifts to cover Jake's private school and tutoring, the English course he begged for, the bologna sandwiches I ate so I could afford better meat for him, the way I drove my loud little car to every corner of the city when he needed a ride. For what? To be called a failure at my own birthday. 3 days later, I was at Trader Joe's, hunting for the cheapest staples when I saw her. Kelly stood in the imported wine aisle, perfectly put together in a blazer that probably cost more than my rent. I thought about ducking down another row, but it was too late. She'd spotted me. "Linda," she said, approaching with a smile that never made it to her eyes. What a coincidence. "Hi, Kelly," I replied, trying for casual and angling my basket so the generic labels wouldn't show. "You know," she went on, voice sugar-sweet and razor-sharp, "I've been thinking about you. I run a consulting company. We need someone to clean the office." Heat crawled up my neck. People nearby started listening without even pretending not to. "Nights, 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., $12 an hour. Good money for that kind of work, don't you think?" She paused dramatically. "And of course, you've got experience." The humiliation sat between us like a display palette. An older woman stopped reading wine labels and watched. A young couple stopped whispering and just stared. Jake's words echoed in my head. You're only good for cleaning bathrooms. But something strange happened. Instead of shame or anger, a cool, flat calm slid over me. Some other part of me woke up, the part that was done being stepped on. You know what, Kelly? I said, keeping my voice even. I'll take it. Her smile flickered. She hadn't expected that. But I wasn't the same Linda she'd counted on humiliating. Great, she said, recovering. Start Monday. The building's on Michigan Avenue, 1247, 15th floor. Ask for the night supervisor. He'll get you settled. Perfect, I said. For the first time in months, my smile felt real. I'm sure I'll learn a lot working there. She frowned slightly, like she heard something under the words and couldn't name it, but I'd already turned away. As I moved through the aisles, something I hadn't felt in ages returned. Purpose. She thought she was putting me in my place. She was actually handing me access to what I needed most. Sometimes the neatest kind of revenge is taking the enemy's offer and using it for your own ends. Kelly was going to learn that not every cleaner is invisible, and not every woman who's been knocked down stays there. There had been something calculated in her eyes when she made the offer, more than simple cruelty. She wanted me close. She wanted to watch me shrink daily. She wanted to make sure I knew exactly where I ranked in her new world. Fine. She'd get exactly what she wanted, and more than she imagined. Monday at 10:45 p.m., I stood beneath the glass and steel tower on Michigan Avenue in my neatest work uniform, carrying the old leather bag my mother once gave me. The place gleamed, the kind of building where people pretend to make important decisions. Gus, the night supervisor, was about 60 with kind eyes and a tired smile. You must be Linda, he said at reception. Ms. Carter left instructions. Carter, so that was her last name. You'll mostly handle the 15th floor, he added. That's the executive level for her company. Important people, lots of confidential paper. In the elevator, he went over the rules. Always wear gloves. Never touch the documents. Dust before you vacuum. Lock up everything when you're done. Ms. Carter's particular about security, he said, handing me a ring of keys. These are yours. Individual access, accountability, and all that. The 15th floor was elegant in a cold way. Glass-walled offices, designer chairs, plants that probably cost more than my grocery budget, and that heavy, expensive silence, like a vault for secrets. I started with Kelly's office. It was exactly what I'd pictured. Big walnut desk, framed degrees, a photo of her shaking hands with a local politician. When I wiped around the desk, I noticed papers scattered as if she'd left in a hurry. And despite Gus's rules, everything sensitive was right there. 2 open folders showed financials. I'm no accountant, but I can read numbers. These didn't match. Carter Advisory had a report showing a $2 million profit in 2023, and another showing a $1.8 million loss, 2 versions of the same year. My heart started to pound. I took out my phone and quietly photographed the pages. I didn't know exactly what I was looking at, but I knew it wasn't normal. Over the next weeks, I built a rhythm. I arrived 15 minutes early, left 15 minutes late. On paper, I looked dedicated. In reality, I used the extra time to observe. Kelly was sloppier than I'd guessed. Contracts spread across her desk, email left open, passwords on sticky notes. That's how I saw the pattern. Kelly wasn't just a polished executive. She was running something rotten. Her companies were a web for washing dirty money. Construction outfits funneled funds through consulting fees. The money came out clean, and she kept a generous slice. I documented everything. I photographed contracts offering public sector strategy to firms that clearly didn't need it. I found emails arranging bribes for city inspectors in exchange for ignoring code violations. There was a notebook with coded tallies. Project A, 200 fragi in, 180K out, 70K fee. The audacity was what stunned me. In a drawer she often forgot to lock, a folder labeled insurance held things that made my scalp prickle. Phantom vendor agreements, fake invoices, payment receipts for public employees who didn't exist, an empire built on fraud, and the photos. Kelly kept pictures from events where she greased palms, at a country club with the city's public works chief, at a high-end restaurant with a federal revenue inspector, at a private party with judges and prosecutors. Trophies, proof of the power she believed she owned. In one photo, I saw Mark in the background raising a champagne flute, dated 2 weeks earlier. My ex wasn't just dating a criminal. He was a prop. He made her look like a family woman, respectable enough for the circles she needed to impress. He thought he'd landed a self-made success. He'd become part of the set dressing. The most shocking turn came when I cleaned other floors. Apparently, Kelly wasn't the only interesting tenant. The 12th floor housed an FBI office, the 13th, a financial crimes unit for the state's attorney. One Thursday around 3 a.m., I heard voices on 12. The building was usually a mausoleum at that hour, but lights were on and people were talking. Curious, I drifted past and saw the door cracked open. "Carter's slicker than we thought," a man said. "A dozen shells at least, all cross-wired." "We can't stall," a woman replied. "She's positioning assets for the Caymans. If it moves, we lose jurisdiction. We need something trial-proof. What we've got is circumstantial." "Can our informant get closer?" "Trying. She's paranoid. Changed passwords 3 times this month." I rode back up with my pulse thudding. This wasn't a random discovery. There was a federal case in motion. Kelly was being hunted, and I had in my phone what they were likely desperate to find. That morning when I got home, I dumped everything onto my laptop. I sorted photos by date, built a spreadsheet of the amounts, and wrote notes explaining each context. It felt like assembling a grim puzzle, each piece revealing another layer of the lie Kelly lived on. By day, she dazzled Mark and my son. By night, while I wiped down her fingerprints, the truth showed through. She was scrambling, moving cash before the hammer fell. And I, the cleaner only good for bathrooms, was recording it all. Life has a brutal sense of humor. While I collected evidence at night, my days were a long ache. Mark and Jake didn't just ignore me. They built a version of life where I simply didn't exist. I learned the worst parts from social media. Mark posted Thanksgiving photos, he, Jake, and Kelly around a perfect table. "Grateful for the new family life gave me," the caption said. Jake commented with heart emojis in a sentence that gutted me. "First Thanksgiving that actually feels worth celebrating. Crystal stemware, fine china, the kind of turkey that costs more than my monthly groceries." Kelly, radiant in a sleek dress, poured wine like the ideal hostess. Mark looked at her with admiration. And Jake? He looked truly happy for the first time in years. I called the next day. One ring, then straight to voicemail. I texted, "Hi, honey, just checking on you. I miss you." 2 blue check marks. Read, ignored. I tried again at Christmas and New Year's, same thing. Seen, ignored. It felt like I had died, but was still alive to feel the grief. Nights became both refuge and punishment. I worked until 6, came home, lay awake. Sleep wouldn't come. I stared at the ceiling and counted losses. I tried melatonin, stronger stuff. Nothing helped. The nightmares began, crowds pointing and laughing. "She's only good for cleaning bathrooms." I'd wake with my heart smashing against my ribs, palms damp. Other times, Jake was 5 again, calling me mommy in that sweet high voice. And when I reached for him, he vanished. The lowest point blindsided me at the grocery store. Mark and Kelly were in the checkout line, buying salmon, asparagus, and expensive white wine. Things Mark never bought when we were married because they didn't fit our budget. He held the basket like an attentive husband, while Kelly picked imported cheeses. I tried to slip past, but Jake jogged up the aisle with a box of fancy cereal. "Dad?" Kelly said I can pick any cereal I want, he shouted, giddy as a kid on Christmas. Then he saw me. For a second, our eyes met. I waited for recognition, maybe a flicker of guilt. All I saw was discomfort. He glanced around to make sure no one saw us together, muttered a barely audible hi, and hurried back to them. Right then, I understood I'd become an embarrassment to my own son. Not just replaced, shameful. A reminder of a life he wanted to erase. Almost a year after I started at Kelly's, confirmation arrived that I was dead to them. Jake posted his high school graduation photo. Mark stood beside him in a new suit, beaming. Kelly smiled like family. The caption read, "Thanks to the people who truly matter." Next stop, University of Illinois. I hadn't known he'd graduated, hadn't known he'd been accepted. 17 years raising a son, and I learned the milestones online. I cried until I thought something in me would burst. The next day, I went back to Michigan Avenue more determined than ever. If they'd thrown me away like trash, I would at least make sure they learned who Kelly really was. Then, one March morning, almost a year in, everything shifted. Sirens screamed past my window, a lot of them. I turned on the TV. There it was. Operation Lakeshore Sweep. Local executive arrested in multi-million-dollar corruption scheme. Kelly, hair undone and blazer creased, eyes wide with panic, was led in handcuffs to a black car. The reporter said she was accused of laundering at least $15 million over 3 years. The suspect ran a complex network of shell companies, the voiceover explained, diverting public funds through sham consulting. According to the FBI, Carter used her social standing to bribe officials and steer contracts to favored firms. My phone rang. Mark. "Linda, did you see?" His voice had lost its cool mask. Only panic remained. "I saw," I said steady. I didn't know. I put everything into her companies, my retirement, the money for Jake's college, all of it. She promised 20% returns. Of course she had. Mark always liked the easy path. "How much?" I asked. $250,000. My stomach went icy. Not for him, but because I knew Jake would get dragged down with it. And now? The FBI froze everything, closed the companies, seized accounts. I'm 3 months behind on rent. I'm going to lose the apartment. He was breathing hard. Does Jake know? He knows. Everyone knows. They're calling her the criminal stepmom. He's miserable. A small, dark corner of me felt grim satisfaction. They had humiliated me and tossed me aside. Now they were tasting the fruit of their choices. The larger part of me, the part that was still a mother, worried about Jake. How is he really? Bad. He won't leave the house. Kids at school are ruthless, and he lost his scholarship. Kelly said she'd cover the rest, but now... The irony was almost too neat. He'd rejected me for being a cleaner and chosen a successful woman. Turns out the successful woman was a criminal, and the cleaner was the only one with her finances in order. That afternoon, Mark called again. "I know I have no right to ask," he said, "but could you loan us something, just until I get on my feet? I'll pay you back as soon as I can. Jake needs therapy. This is wrecking him." The man who let our son call me useless was begging the failed cleaner for help. "Mark," I said, "I'll think about it." I already knew my answer. That night at the building, Gus was packing boxes. "It's over, Linda," he said with a tired smile. "With Carter arrested, the contract's done. Last shift." I stared at the elevator to 15, where I'd spent so many nights tracing the truth. There was a strange rightness in it ending there. My part was finished, even though I hadn't handed anything to the FBI. They'd found their way without me, or through someone else. But I had something they didn't. The grim satisfaction of having watched the fall up close. Sometimes the cleanest revenge is patience, letting a criminal collapse under the weight of her own lies. 2 weeks after the arrest, I heard my name in a crowded store. Jake, red-faced and furious, marched toward me. For a heartbeat, hope flared. Maybe he wanted his mother. "You!" he shouted, loud enough for half the aisle to turn. "This is your fault!" "Jake, No, you ruined my life!" Tears burned in his eyes. "If you weren't such a failure, if you weren't just a pathetic cleaner, Kelly wouldn't have done what she did." People stopped pretending not to listen. An older woman watched with pity. A couple whispered behind their hands. I felt small, but not because of the spectacle, because my son was that lost. "Jake, she made choices," I said softly. She did it to give me a better future," he snapped, "because she knew I deserved more than this." He waved at me as if I were something to wipe off a shoe. "If it weren't for you, if she hadn't had to rescue me from your mediocre life, she wouldn't have risked anything." His logic was twisted, but he believed it. He'd made her a martyr, a woman who sacrificed everything to save him from ordinary. "She's gone," he said, voice cracking. "The only person who really understood me is gone because of you. You wrecked everything." He stormed off, leaving me standing among boxes of cereal with a dozen strangers staring. I paid and went home and cried until there was nothing left, not out of guilt, out of grief. I finally mourned the version of my son I thought I'd raised. The worst was still ahead. The next night, Mark showed up at my door unannounced, eyes sunken, clothes wrinkled, smelling like liquor and desperation. "Linda, we need to talk." I let him in and set a mug of coffee in front of him. He sat on the old couch where we once watched movies and looked at me with a wild, blaming need. "Jake told me about yesterday," he said, raking a hand through his hair. "He's suffering." "I know," I said. "You don't," he snapped, a cold anger rising. "You have no idea what we lost, what I lost, because of your pathetic existence." He stood and paced like a caged animal. $250,000, Linda, 20 years of work. Now I'm worse off than when we got married. "Mark, I'm sorry for what happened, but if you weren't who you are, if you tried to be someone, Kelly wouldn't have needed to show us how to live. She saw how our son was humiliated having a mother who cleans. She saw he couldn't invite friends over because you always smelled like disinfectant." The absurdity stunned me into silence. Then something in me either broke or clicked into place. I stood, feeling a clean, steady calm. "Leave," I said, quiet but steel hard. "Linda, get out of my house," I said, pointing to the door. "Now, before I call the police." He stared like the world had tilted. "Be reasonable. We're going through something hard. We can't let—" "You made your choices," I said, opening the door. "You humiliated me. You threw me away. You told the world I was only good for cleaning bathrooms. And now you want me to save you from the consequences? Think about Jake," he pleaded. "He's your son. Jake made it clear he doesn't want a cleaner for a mother. Let the memory of perfect Kelly take care of him. I'm done begging for scraps of love in my own family." He stood there, unable to compute that I was really done. "You'll regret this," he said finally, empty threat in his voice. "The only thing I regret," I said, "is that it took me 46 years to understand I deserve better than second-class treatment in my own home." I shut the door. For the first time in months, real, quiet joy stirred somewhere deep inside. 3 days later, Mark called again, desperation stripped raw. "We're being evicted Friday," he said. "Jake's panicking. He thought maybe you could help. Maybe he was wrong about some things." So now maybe he was wrong. Not because he loved me, not because he'd realized the years of sacrifice, because they needed money. "Mark," I said, voice cool as ice, "you made it clear I'm just the cleaner, a failure, the reason your lives went off course. Please don't be cruel." "Cruel," I repeated, and a laugh came out dry and humorless. Cruel was being called a failure at my own birthday dinner. Cruel was being blamed for a woman's crimes. Cruel was finding out about my son's graduation on Instagram. "He's your son," Mark said. "Jake is a 17-year-old who had a mother who loved him without condition and chose a woman funded by dirty money," I said. "Now he can learn that choices have consequences." "He's suffering. He lost his scholarship. His friends mock him. When I was suffering, when you humiliated me in front of everyone, where was your concern? When I worked 12 hours to keep him in school, did anyone care if I ate? If I slept?" The silence stretched. "So that's it?" he asked finally. "You're abandoning us?" "No," I said evenly. "You abandoned me a long time ago. I'm just agreeing with the reality you built." "Linda, Mark, you made it clear I don't belong in your lives. I'm a source of shame. So go live the life you chose without the failed cleaner. I'm sure you'll do fine." I hung up and slept through the night without a single nightmare. Sometimes dignity is worth more than love that only appears when it needs something. Sometimes the first real yes in your life starts with a no. With Kelly in jail and my family finally, truly out of my orbit, I decided to rebuild. Not just survive, live. For the first time in years, I made plans that belonged to me, dreams that didn't require anyone's approval. During the cleaner years, I'd taken 2 online certificates, Small Business Administration and Human Resources. I used to think they might help me land a better job. Now I saw something bigger. With the money I'd quietly saved, savings Mark and Jake never knew existed, I had enough to start something of my own. Linda's Cleaning Solutions was born on a Tuesday when I signed the LLC papers at City Hall. It wasn't just a cleaning company. It was a declaration of independence, and it had one thing most cleaning services didn't: a mission. I wanted to hire women who'd been through hell, rough divorces, domestic violence, family rejection, long gaps in work. My first hire was Emily, 38, who lost everything after discovering her husband was sleeping with her best friend. 20 years in the trash, she said in our interview, fighting tears. He kept the house, the friends, even the dog. Said all I was good for was staying home. Next came Diane, 52, laid off after 20 years when her company restructured and replaced her with cheaper, younger hires. They said I couldn't keep up with tech, she said bitterly. Truth is, my pay was too high. Then Megan, 29, who'd fled an abusive relationship with 2 small kids and had no references because her ex never let her work. He said I was too stupid to do anything, she whispered. No one will hire me. Each woman carried a story of strength disguised as fragility, and each understood the miracle of a second chance. We started small, houses, a few tiny offices downtown. But our edge wasn't only great work. It was discretion and sharp eyes. If you stay invisible long enough, you learn to see what other people miss. In our line, that became an asset. During a contract at a law firm, Emily noticed one partner siphoning from pension funds. "Look at these numbers, Linda," she said, showing me documents she'd found, accidentally, on a desk. "They don't match the client statements." Diane, cleaning for an accountant, noticed a construction business hiding tax debt for 3 years. 2 ledgers, she told me, one for show, one for real. In each case, we passed information anonymously to the right authorities. We weren't hunting trouble. It just kept walking into the room. And once you've been trampled by life, it's hard to stand by while others are set up to be hurt. In 6 months, Linda's Cleaning Solutions had 15 employees and a wait list. Not because we were the best scrubbers in Chicago, though we were very good, but because word spread about our integrity. Honest owners hired us knowing their secrets were safe. Dishonest ones learned to behave with us around. That's when I met Tom. He owned a small landscaping company and hired us twice a week. Unlike most clients, Tom greeted everyone by name, asked about kids, left fresh water and coffee. "It's rare to see a boss treat people like this," I said while Diane cleaned the bathroom and Emily organized the conference room. My mom cleaned offices for 20 years, he said, glancing at his crew planting flowers outside. She used to say you see a person's character by how they treat those serving them. Tom was 48, divorced 5 years, with a 22-year-old daughter studying veterinary medicine at the University of Illinois. He was kind in a way that reminded me how I once imagined love should be. No games, no manipulation, just respect. We started grabbing coffee after the team finished. We talked work, plants. He tried to teach me gardening, books. We both loved biographies. He never pried into my past, never made condescending comments about my job. There's something different about you, he said one afternoon while we watered office plants. You look like someone who's been through a lot and refused to let it define her. And how do you know it didn't? I asked. Because you hire wounded women and show them how to fly. Broken people don't do that. It was the first time in years someone named strength in me instead of weakness. After 8 months of coffees and simple dinners, if you could call it dating, Tom asked if I wanted to move in. He had a small, bright house in Evanston with a backyard garden and a tree his daughter planted as a kid. You don't have to, he said, suddenly awkward. I just thought maybe you'd want to wake up to something beautiful instead of another block of apartments. The house looked out on a small lake. For the first time in my life, I'd opened my eyes to water and birds and the possibility of peace. I moved on a Friday in September. Emily, Diane, and Megan helped, and we turned it into a little backyard party. Tom grilled, the women brought salads. For the first time in years, I felt held by a family I chose. But scars don't vanish on command. Even with a kind man, a solid business, and a beautiful view, there were nights I woke sweating, hearing Jake's voice calling me a failure, hearing Mark's accusations, seeing Kelly's smirk. It will fade, Tom would say, pulling me close. Not overnight, but it will. Years later, I learned he was half right. Wounds heal, scars stay. Maybe that's better. They remind you never to settle for less than respect. Jake reached out occasionally after he started college, always for money. Textbooks, car trouble, medical bills. I lent small amounts and kept my heart guarded. I'd learned the difference between love and need, between longing and convenience. How can you be so cold? Tom asked once after I hung up. I'm not cold, I said. I'm careful. He had 17 years to love me back. Now he has the rest of his life to decide if he wants a relationship or just a bank account with feelings. Tom understood, but I knew he couldn't fill the hole my family left. That wasn't his burden. Some pain you carry yourself, and that's okay. The sharpest cut came 3 years later on an ordinary morning over coffee. A notification popped up. Jake had tagged a church in Champaign. I tapped the photo and my heart stalled. His wedding. Jake, glowing in a rented tux, stood beside a smiling blonde I'd never met. Mark wore a dark suit, proud in the way I'd always wished he'd be beside our son. Groomsmen, bridesmaids, elegant flowers, everything a mother dreams of. I hadn't been invited. I hadn't even known he was serious about anyone. Happiest day of my life, the caption read. Thanks to everyone who made it happen. He tagged dozens of people. College friends, co-workers, distant relatives I didn't know he knew, everyone but me. In the comments, Mark wrote, Proud of the man you've become, son. Your mother would be proud. Your mother. As if I'd died. As if I'd never existed. I stared at the photo for hours until Tom came home and found me crying in the kitchen. What happened? He asked, dropping to his knees beside me. He got married, I said, showing him my phone. My son got married, and I learned about it on Instagram. He held me. He didn't say it would be okay or try to tidy up the pain. He just stayed. Months went by. I kept up with Jake the way strangers follow celebrities. They moved into a small but nice apartment in Chicago. He got a marketing job. They vacationed in Florida. Smiles in every frame. Never a mention of me. Then, a year later, came the photo that broke me open and remade me at once. Jake cradling a baby boy. "Meet my prince, Owen," the caption read. "The love of my life." I was a grandmother. I had a grandson named Owen, and I learned about him from a post. That night, I created a folder on my computer. I saved every picture of Owen I could find. The hospital, the first smile, the first bath, first steps, and organized them by date as if I actually knew him. It was pathetic. I knew it. But it was the only way I had to be part of his life, even if he never knew I existed. "You should reach out," Tom said one evening, finding me sorting the latest photos. "A baby can change things." I tried once. I wrote, "I heard you became a father. Congratulations. If you ever want me to meet my grandson, I'd love that." 2 days later. "Thanks. I don't think that's a good idea right now. Maybe later. Maybe later." The phrase every rejected mother knows, a polite never, but I refused to let bitterness define me. I carried the pain with dignity. I worked. I grew the company. I looked after my employees like family. In the end, blood isn't the only way we claim each other. Family is who stays when the storm hits. 3 years passed. Linda's Cleaning Solutions had 25 employees and contracts with some of the biggest firms in Chicago. Emily became my partner. Diane ran operations. Megan opened our first franchise in Madison. We all carried old pain we'd turned into power. During that growth, I formalized something I'd been doing quietly for years, a support group for mothers rejected by their kids. We rented a small room at a Methodist church on Wednesday nights. Women of every age came, tied together by the same grief. Sarah, 60, whose daughter hadn't spoken to her in 15 years over an inheritance fight. Lisa, 45, whose twins chose their wealthy father after the divorce. Margaret, 55, whose daughter cut her off when she came out at 50. "The worst part," Margaret said one night, "is feeling like you failed as a mother, like everything you did was for nothing." "It wasn't for nothing," I said, looking around the circle. "We loved. We gave everything. If they can't see that, the failure isn't ours." We started as 5 women in a borrowed room. 2 years later, we had 3 weekly groups serving more than 40. We built a Facebook page, a WhatsApp chat, and a small website with articles and resources. We weren't therapists, but we were something just as valuable. Women who understood because we'd lived it. Tom and I married in our backyard on a bright Saturday, a simple ceremony with 12 guests. Emily stood beside me as maid of honor. Our team decorated the garden with flowers Tom had grown just for that day. It wasn't the big celebration I once dreamed of. It was better. It was ours. "For someone who took 46 years to find happiness, you're doing great," Tom joked in his vows, making me laugh through tears. "For someone marrying a woman with enough emotional baggage for an international move, you're very brave," I answered, and everyone laughed. It wasn't a perfect ending. Those don't exist. Jake still reached out when he needed money. Mark disappeared. I still had the occasional nightmare about that birthday. Owen grew up in photos. First birthday, first day of school, first baseball game. And I remained a quiet witness. But I learned that happiness isn't the absence of pain. It's purpose, built anyway. Linda's Cleaning Solutions became more than a business. It became proof that women the world tried to discard could rise and create something that mattered. The support circle became a net strong enough to catch each other. And I, the cleaner only good for bathrooms, became a mentor, an owner, a loved wife, an example that it's never too late to start again. Sometimes, when I'm filing the newest pictures of Owen, Tom asks if I regret anything. "I regret that it took me so long to understand I deserved more," I say, "but I don't regret loving, even when it wasn't honored." The love we give doesn't just shape the people who receive it. It shapes us. The wound of losing my son and grandson may never fully close, but around that wound, I've built a life filled with purpose, steady love, and brave women who learned, as I did, that strength isn't never falling. It's getting up every time and deciding it's worth trying again. In the end, maybe that's the sharpest revenge of all, not just surviving rejection, but flourishing in spite of it.